this. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. So that is Daniel chapter 8. And that's a lot of imagery, isn't it? That's a lot of stuff to pick through. So let's begin to break this apart. First question we want to ask is, Daniel had an amazing vision in which he saw a ram with two horns. Who does this ram represent? Now, if you were paying attention, it told us right there in chapter 8 who that ram was. We don't even have to speculate. Does anybody want to volunteer that information? Give us the verse and tell us who that ram is, if you will. Yes.
In verse 20, it says it was Media Persia.
Okay, verse 20. It tells us very clearly, the ram which thou sawest, having two horns, are the kings of Media Persia. And so here the Bible is helping us to unlock its own mysteries. Now, I put this question here, where is Babylon? Because there's a principle that we're going to begin to see here in Daniel. It's called repeat and expand. And all that means is that as we move through Daniel and we're looking at these prophecies, we're seeing that they're repeating over the same ground. You'll notice that in Daniel chapter 2, remember the vision of the gold statue, the gold head and then the silver and so on? That statue represented Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And then as we got to Daniel chapter 7, really the same information was given to us again, but this time it was given to us in the imagery of these beasts. But again, they represented Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Now, what was different with the beast is that it gave us greater detail. Remember that the statue was very vague and it was sort of like flying an airplane very high above the ground. We see some of the details, but we don't really get a lot of information. Well, Daniel chapter 7, it's as if the plane came in for a closer view, and we get more details about each one of these kingdoms. The bear, for example, was said to have 3 ribs in its mouth. And as we studied that out, we found that ribs were part of another beast. So this bear had taken hold of 3 other beasts in order to come into power. And this leopard with the wings we found out was swiftness, and the 4 heads being the 4 generals that took over after Alexander the Great died. And so greater details being given. So Daniel, the book of Daniel, practices something prophetically that we call repeat and expand. It is repeating the same information but expanding on that information. So why is it that you think in what we just read in Daniel 8 that it starts with Media Persia? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Why is Babylon skipped at this point in this prophetic scheme of things?
Time and progress prophecies have been fulfilled as we're moving forward.
That's right. That's right. Bill gave the right answer. I mean, we're moving forward at this point. Now, even though this is still during the time of Babylon, Babylon's time is short. It's about to end. And you'll notice as we begin chapter 9 of Daniel, Babylon is already gone. And so Persia is really the next big thing on the horizon for God's people prophetically. Number 2, next, Daniel saw a goat with a great horn between his eyes. What does this mean? Now again, the Bible interprets itself. Anybody like to give the verse and the answer to that question as we read it in Daniel 8? Give us the verse and the answer to that question.
21. The male goat is the kingdom of Greece.
All right, thank you. Daniel 8:21. The rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, right? So there we have the answer to that question. Now the prophecy continues. As we go on, it says, what we just read, we know that the first horn was the first king. Now, who was the first king of Greece? Alexander the Great, right? Moving with great speed, just as this prophecy told us that it came with great speed against the other animal. Daniel 8:21 and 22, now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation. So when Alexander the Great went down, 4 came up in his place. And through history we know that eventually who came to power in Greece after fighting over who was going to rule were 4 generals. Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. And so we find that prophecy coming true. Number 3, then a little horn sprouts up from out of one of the 4 winds. What power did this little horn represent? Now, the Bible gave us many clues as we read through there. Daniel 8:23 through 25. I just put down several of them here. It described this little horn. It said his power shall be mighty. It said that it shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. It also described this power as exalting himself as high, as the Prince of Hosts. It went on to say that it had fierce features and sinister schemes. It shall exalt himself in his heart, and it would rise against the Prince of Princes. And so looking at all those clues, who do you think it is? Most study Bibles will tell us that it's Antiochus Epiphanes, but we understand something differently, don't we? Who do we understand it to be? Rome. And looking at all the clues that the Bible gives us, Rome is really the only one that could fulfill all those descriptions that were given. Remember the repeat and expand that we talked about? It wouldn't make sense for us to end up with Antiochus Epiphanes, since every one of these visions that Daniel had came to an end. You remember the vision of the statue? What was the last thing that happened in the statue? Anybody remember? The stone that was cut out without hands, right? Came and destroyed the image. What about the one in Daniel 7? Anybody remember what happened at the end of that vision? Basically, God reigns, doesn't He? His kingdom reigns at that point. And it's the same thing with this vision that we're seeing here. It comes until the end. We're told that this little horn would be destroyed, but not with his own power, right? Verse 25 at the end it says, "But he shall be broken without human means." Okay? And so we find this reaching to the end as well. But in every one of those visions, what came after Greece? Rome. Rome came after Greece in every one of these visions. And so it would only stand to reason, with all the clues that we have, with the history that we can look at that matches those clues, and the repeat and expand, and the fact that all these prophecies reach until the end, that this is talking about Rome. First of all, Rome in its pagan form, and then Rome as it developed into its papal form. Another interesting thing that I wanted to point out, just another clue about why it has to be Rome, is that in Daniel 8 and verse 4, Medo-Persia is described as great. In verse 8, Greece is described as very great. And by the time we get to verse 9, describing the little horn, the Bible says it is exceedingly great. Now, when you look at the story, Antiochus Epiphanes, he was never exceedingly great. He was never very great. At best, he might have been great. Now, he did lord himself over Jerusalem for a short period of time, which they tried to make the prophetic significance of his life. But when you look at all the clues together and the significance of the prophecy, we understand that Rome is the only thing that could fulfill this prophecy. Remember, fierce features and sinister schemes, shall exalt himself in his heart, and rise against the Prince of Princes. Now here is another major clue. He's going to rise against the Prince of Princes. Now, if you have Daniel 8 open, just look at verse 10. Daniel 8 and verse 10, it says, speaking of this little horn, "And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them." Okay, keep that in mind. So it'll rise against the Prince of Princes. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 3, in describing Satan during the time of Rome's rule, is described this way: "And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon." Now, who's the dragon? Satan. "Having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads." Now, how many heads do we have in this vision to this point? We have Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. And how many heads did Greece have? 4, right? So that brings us to 6. And then one more would be Rome, which would be the 7th head. So this dragon is described as having 7 heads. Dragon, who is Satan in this imagery, having 7 heads. At what point in history are we at right here? We're at Rome, the 7th head. What happened?